Please hit like, share, and subscribe. Now enjoy the Practical Guitarist podcast. Okay.
Good evening, Jim.
Good evening, David.
I'm having an allergic reaction while we're doing the show tonight.
Oh.
My eyes, I don't know if you could tell, they're like watering and they're itchy and they're all red.
Yeah, I see that. I see that.
Got my allergy meds right here.
Yep, I had to take Zyrtec, and usually I'll take a Benadryl to start things off, to kick things off. And the other day I had to take a Benadryl. I was exploding, and it was right before. We'll get to the gig report. I'll talk to that. But
funny little aside. So it is the time of year for allergies, but
yep.
I ran out my last year in a fiscal year with my flex card from work, and I had like $1,000 left over, or like $1,200 left over. So I had to blow all that money. So I just went and bought like 2 years worth of allergy medication, like 15 bottles of ibuprofen. It's just nuts.
I would have done it too.
Band-Aids.
When I first got my first FSA card, you could use it into March of the following year.
Right.
And so I would always, I'd reach the end of the year and I go, oh, I didn't use enough. I'm going to get glasses, or I would go get and I get expensive glasses.
And we do stuff like that too, because you obviously I most of the years I don't have a bunch left over, but because we were all home last year, nobody used any medical services, so it was like, what am I supposed to do with all this money? Well, it's tax free, so I bought my wife 15 wrist braces because I bought her 15 different ones. She could try them all. Because she's got carpal tunnel, so it's this whole thing, and now she's just swapping in different ones. It's well, this one I like to wear when I sleep.
and different ones work at different times. I have the same thing. I like to wear one, especially my right wrist, because I tend to do this, and so I put my right hand over, and I don't support the hand, and it just kind of hangs. Even though I sleep in a bed alone. I sleep in a queen-size bed alone. And instead of being in the middle of the bed, I'm over on the side, falling off. I don't know. You spend a lot of time fighting that urge when you get, after you've been married. And
we're right.
The same bed and stuff. So, yeah.
I got what's new. Let me share mine first, because I know you got one too. Because ours is not mine is not a big surprise, right? So after last week's podcast.
Yes,
my whammy showed up. I got a whammy. The WH5.
And tell people how long it took to come from London, England.
All right, so I ordered it on Sunday, and I had it Tuesday.
Oh, that's the other. What's new?
I had it Tuesday. And we've got Digitech news later in the podcast about what's happening there. Digitech products are starting to show up again. You can, in fact, I got into trouble because I also had a WH5 on the way from Sweetwater the next day. So it was
but they're the only ones, really. And I think there's an Amazon. There's an Amazon
seller
affiliate that's got some. But that's really not saying that there's a ton of them out there, because Guitar Center doesn't have any yet. And
I think standing orders. So put yourself in this position. You heard from somebody that Digitech is having problems, and your Guitar Center, do you want to risk buying, ordering a bunch of products, putting money down, or having a credit note down when you don't know if they're ever going to show up?
Right.
So that's a big part of it. But I also think that they were floating around, but they were pretty scarce. Okay. So we'll talk about what I think actually happened at the end of the podcast. I'm glad I got my WH5 though, because I'll be honest with you, this is so much better than the WH4 I had years ago and sold. I mean, that's the one that David Gilmour uses. So
right.
just put that in perspective, it's a brand new pedal that actually ended up on David Gilmour's board.
Yep.
Well, not as
And there's not a lot of new stuff on his board.
Technically next to his board, but you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and actually, the other thing that really surprised me about it is it's like a pancake. I thought it was,
I know, it's crazy,
because
right?
the last iteration was like that tall, you know. This thing's like come in this little box. I'm like, in fact, it showed up in an envelope, and my wife goes, she goes, I think they sent you the wrong pedal. And I was like, I don't know, let's open it up and find out, you know. But it looks like things are going to be changing over in that camp. So we'll talk about it later in the episode. Jim, you've got wonderful What's News. I have one more thing to share.
Yep, go ahead.
Underneath my desk is a box, and I'm not going to get it out from under. It's a big box that has parts from Mauser for building for building myself a King of Tone. I'm actually going to build myself, because I need a second one, because I'm going to have two boards, and they're going to be very, very close, with a King of Tone on one of them, and it'll actually have the HX Stomp and some other stuff on there, but it's going to be very, very, like, small and specific. And then I'm going to have my other board with the Amp 1 on it that's going to be, you know, the more general purpose, but still very small and specific. And so we're going to go down that path, and I'll share with podcasts and everything when we start to head down there what that's all going to look like. Anyway, Jim, now it's your turn.
Yep, I have a bunch of stuff. So, like you, but
yeah, you mentioned that you had one on order, so that's not a shock for anybody.
Yep, this came in before we did the gig, so threw it on the board rehearsal day, which was only 3 business days later, by the way. Mm-hmm. 4. So the 4th business day, but he got it the day before, so it was 3 business days. That's how long it took me to get from the UK. Now, I'm not saying that because I'm putting down Sweetwater or anybody like that. I'm just saying that just speaks to our internal shipping processes and how things just sit. Because you were telling me yours came in, sat at some distribution center.
Yeah, it was in Franklin Park, Illinois for like a day before it arrived. So it was actually in the States the next day, sitting in a sorting facility. Like, that's just wild to me. DHL is not screwing around. Let's just put it that way.
And this thing is so small. The box looks huge. I'm like, what did they do?
Well, you've owned one before.
The pedal only fits like right in this little slot. Yeah. They do give you the power supply, and they did give me a UK power supply.
Yeah, they all do that. Like Digitech's done that for years, where you get all the necessary power supplies for overseas. Which
is really cool. So I got the UK power supply. Don't really care. I probably never use it. It went on the board for rehearsal that night. Myself and the other guitar player used it, and it was like, wow, buying another one. Mm-hmm. So we both ordered another one. Just saying, these things are great little pedals. If you've got a drop in it, but here's the thing you got to remember, because this is what I found out the first gig afterwards. You have to remember to turn it off.
You start playing and you're like, wait, what the hell? Like,
it was out of tune.
Yeah, like, why am I in flat tuning? Like, what? My biggest problem with those devices is, like, I can hear my strings even on stage, and it's it throws me a little bit.
I'm either using in-ears or we're so loud. So the gigs we did, well, I'll get to the gig report when I get there, but you'll understand why there was no way I was going to hear my strings. Not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to throw this box because I don't care.
Yeah.
It's just got a power supply in it. All right. So I think I talked about this. I ordered I don't know if I talked about it on the channel, but I ordered a white cable.
It's got green on it. You're going to have to pull that green off.
Notice the guitar. Yeah, I know. I'm actually going to use plumber's. I'm literally just going to take plumber's tape. Because they make a white plumber's tape. I got a white stand.
What are you, a stormtrooper?
Yeah, kind of. Well, like I said, I got that. I'm going to have a white guitar. And, or I have a white guitar. And this thing is hard to get out. And I got this, which I'm unveiling here. I'm going to unveil 2 things. So this unveiling is a white Telefunken M80 Super Cardioid microphone. Unfortunately, it has this. It goes with the white and black aesthetic, which is fine.
Get some spray paint.
Yeah, that's what my son said. He said, "Dad, just spray paint stuff that's black, and don't worry about it." But I'm not gonna spray paint this.
No,
But it does come with the bag. I gotta say that this bag feels a little bit different than the Shure bags. Shure bags
nicer
feel
or
a little more leathery. This feels a little more not as nice.
yeah.
Which I was surprised because these are a lot more money.
Well, Shure used to have really nice bags, and they have
I still
slowly
have all
gotten
my Shure
crappier and crappier over the years.
Yeah.
Because I've got one of the old Shure bags from the 90s, and
Yeah.
it's
I do too.
noticeably heavier padding, and like the
Nice and
leather
thick.
feels
Like a real leather. Got that thing. So now I've got one more thing. So I talked about this on the channel, and I said, I kind of need this. And at the gig, I said, I'm not where I want it. I kind of need it.
Mhm.
And so I
Well, let me know how
on
that M80 sounds, because I'm always curious about microphones and vocal mics, because everybody I know uses 58s, but I sort of want to start exploring other vocal mics of that ilk.
my rep has a channel where, because he's my Sweetwater rep is a what do you call a saxophonist. Bless you.
Yep.
A saxophonist, and he has a channel where he does a lot of mics, and he did the Telefunken, and he said, Jim, if you're not going to spend the money on a $400 Shure SM99, or it was a really high end. It was out of the SM series. It was like a KM99 or something. He goes, get this M80, and you'll really like it. And he goes, and it's a step beyond the 58 beta. He goes, you'd hear a definite difference between it.
Yeah, because the
Right, so-
beta is a standard for a lot of my friends. So
Yep.
anyway,
So I got the Taylor.
yep, that's the Mini.
This is the Koa Mini. So one thing to know, people who have had them,
It's a nice
who have
top on
played
it, by the
them,
way.
it's a beautiful top. And you know what? You see how nicely book matched that is?
Yeah,
They took the time to do the same thing on the back. Look at
yeah.
that.
I mean, they're and because they use machines to do so much, they can spend more time doing that kind of stuff there.
Right.
The only problems that I've heard people report to me about Taylor over the years are that because they use what I would call replaceable construction methods,
Yep.
necks warping, stuff
Yep.
like that.
Yep.
So just, keep your eyes on that. But
I well aware of the neck and top problems that have been reported. So, and I bought another very important thing the minute I bought it.
mhm.
I'll show that in a second. So, Taylor GS Mini. This is the Koa Plus. So it's got the higher end. I'm just showing the little knobs here, the little knobbies. The higher end Fishman pickup system. Easy to replace battery. Just like you probably have. It's on the butt end. Just pop the battery out, pop the battery back in. And it's short. So these are short scaled. So the minis are 23 something scale versus a 24 3/4 or a 25-inch scale. So they are a shorter scale guitar. And you can tell. When you hold it, you can tell right away. It's all about the 12th to the, here. You're not going to be playing up here anytime soon. Past the 14th fret is a pain in the rear.
Yeah, I always thought that was a problem on mine, even when I was playing over the well over the 14th.
Yeah, and you play. Yeah, and you
I
play
literally
hard.
got my hand like up on the flat top. It's almost like tapping.
When they said that it came with, let me put this on the. They said it came in a case. I went, oh man, I really prefer the bags. They have these beautiful bags. And he goes, have you seen the case? And I go, no. And he goes, you kind of probably want the case. And they brought down the case. The case is a bag,
Yeah,
but it's like a really hard bag.
yeah, it's like the Kiesel bags. It's very, very stiff and like rigid.
with the rigid thing in the neck. You know, the guitar's not even in there. They got this rigid cover for it, and they've got the pocket obviously in the front, all that good stuff. So I was actually like, you know, I like that. I was going to just ask them for an aftermarket bag because a lot of people leave the bags and they buy cases.
Yeah, those. I mean, Taylor in general doesn't skimp on the accessories.
No.
So.
And this, and I bought this separately. So if you're buying an acoustic,
You might as well.
Because you're going to want to get one of these. This will get put in tonight and stuck in it. This room
I
is...
can't imagine where you're at though. Is like you're in a need for adding moisture. It's probably more.
It's more
when it gets dry with a few times a year.
There's about 3 months of the year where it gets dry, and that's about it. Where these humidipacks are.
How long does a humidipack last you? Out of curiosity.
My humidipack so far, I bought one for the Gibson, and I literally threw it away on purpose a year and a half later. It didn't need to be replaced, but
right.
I was like, all right, I better throw it away and get new ones.
Right, you might as well. I mean, for what they cost, you know.
$20 for insurance.
Right.
So it was one of those things that was a kind of an impulse buy, but the case is nice. They do a good job. And the other thing that I liked about the case, I don't know why I'm zipping it, is they kind of age. They even age the stuff here, so it looks, because I've got cases, you know, where the bags where this gets tarnished. They tarnish it for you. They're like, you know what? It's gonna get tarnished. We'll just tarnish it for you. But it sounds beautiful.
I don't care about. I mean, I don't really care about the zippers and that kind of crap. As long as the zipper's sturdy.
And it's a sturdy looking zipper.
Like almost all zippers are made by YKZ anyway. So
I know. Yeah, I was gonna say the same company makes just about every zipper, whether you're talking blue jeans or your luggage.
Even if it doesn't say YKZ or whatever it is on there, or what's YKK, even if it doesn't say that, even if it doesn't say that on there, it's still made by them.
It probably is.
Chances are. So, all right. So is that all over what's new?
I think that's my whole what's new, which is a lot. That's a lot of what's new.
There's a lot of stuff. You know, we're 20 minutes in, so.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to talk about the first topic, which actually Jim brought to my attention, and I sort of did a little bit of light reading on it real fast before we did the episode. But we're going to talk about Gibson's representation at Coachella,
or lack thereof.
Yeah. Go, Jim, because I think this means a lot to you, and to me, it's like this is exactly what I've been saying all along. Yeah.
First of all, the surprise factor to me was
it's
this
like
big.
Nil, right?
Oh, and there's another thing. There's a bass guitar we should probably talk about for about 40 seconds that kind of gave me the same thing. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I talked about.
Everybody's like, oh my God, this $400 bass. And it's like, every single thing you read or get on the internet, it says subject to change. It says it right on there. Subject to change without prior notice or whatever. So that's even in jobs. I mean, it's like, so what you're saying is that they may have changed it. They might not have. You may have gotten one that was not the same. Who knows? So that's the biggest news. It's not news that's flown through the. It's a beautiful thing what the internet does. First of all, it's Coachella. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying Coachella isn't big. Coachella is huge. Coachella is a gigantic thing. But Coachella is famous for what types of artists? Indie artists. And it's young indie artists. And they're looking to be, looking to do their thing. They're not typically backed by a lot of money from, labels or anything like that. And of course they're going to be backed by stuff. But there was one, I had to laugh because one of the artists at Coachella, because I'll tell you who else wasn't big at Coachella, was Texas Roadhouse. And you're like, Jim, what does Texas Roadhouse have to do with this? I'll tell you what Texas Roadhouse does do with it. It costs a little more than money to eat there than Taco Bell, who got a big shout out because someone said, "Yes, I brought back the Mexican pizza at Taco Bell." So I'm just saying that the target of there isn't, the target audience. And I'm talking about the audience outside of Coachella. I'm talking about the people who would watch it, the people who enjoy the music. And there's nothing wrong with that music. And that folks, they're not looking to buy Gibsons. And they're not, even if everyone there played a Gibson, I don't think it would sell more than a few more Gibsons because of the price tag. Honestly, I think you could have given every artist there a Gibson and they still would have been, yeah, well, Harley Benton's just as good. Well, Firefly's just as good. This one's just as good. So I don't think that really would have been money well spent. And, to give a bunch away. And Gibson is doing stuff for younger artists, or they have been. It's just that those people they haven't made it big yet. And so it's a process and it's a thing. And there were people talking about how it was mostly clean guitars and clean sounds and clean amps. I'm like, yeah, that's a thing that does this in the music market. For years we hear clean music and that's what's popular and everybody loves clean. And then all of a sudden they want everything down tuned and unless anybody doesn't remember emo and screamo and then the stuff that followed that and Linkin Park and everything else. I mean, I'm talking about the 90s, folks. That was post my time. So, and we had it. We had the clean stuff, and then we had the stuff that came afterwards. Everybody was like, "Screw disco. We want to hear, stuff that rocks." So, it just goes in cycles. And I don't think it is what everybody made it up to be. That's what I'm going to say. It was my long way of saying it was the biggest piece of news that wasn't a piece of news to me, this, right along the Gretsch 6020 or whatever that had a pickup that wasn't the right thing. It was just, ta-da, surprise, huh? That was surprising, shocking. A bunch of people at marathons ran with sneakers. I mean, it was like, okay.
So I just want to back up for a second because, all right, I'm going to make myself look really dumb. And that's fine.
No, you're not.
I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago was the first time I heard of Coachella. Okay.
Yep. That'll be for me too.
And it was but right around the time like Burning Man and all that stuff was taking off and South by Southwest and all the different major music festivals that sort of spun out of Woodstock.
Yep.
2003 or whatever that just like blew up and like collapsed on itself. And so most of these music festivals, right, are driven by independent talent, okay, or people that are like maybe right on the tier of like hitting that successful limit. And I would suspect that some of these artists that are appearing at Coachella are like right there about to make it, being the big new name, right? So the kind of names I would expect to see on a roster for Coachella are people like Machine Gun Kelly and those kind of artists. I don't see a lot of them in the roster actually, which is kind of surprising to me. But I'm gonna put some things out that I think might actually shed some more interesting light on this in the respect that like I think people assume that Coachella is like this big haven for the major acts, and really the only one I saw in here was Billie Eilish. And so, and that's not to say I'm totally out of touch with music. I see some other names I recognize, but don't necessarily know their music. Like Harry Styles is on here, for example. And I'm not really in touch with like the pop music right now. Just not. But Fatboy Slim, is going to be there. Was or is going to be there. I was there because I think it's over now, right?
Right. It ended.
And Danny Elfman, which that one was bizarre to me because I'm like, wait, this guy's a film scoring person now. Like he had his heyday with Oingo Boingo, and then he went off and he started scoring film. What the hell is he doing at Coachella?
I forgot he was with Oingo Boingo.
Yeah, like that is
that's right.
really, really weird to me.
It's
to
a
see
dead
him.
man's party.
So the reason why I bring this up is because Coachella isn't really about the music. It hasn't been ever. I know people want to make it about the music. Do you know what it's about? It's about the celebrities who go and like post their Instagram pictures of their freaking fancy like accommodations. And, oh, look at us. We're having, margaritas watching so-and-so on the main stage in our private cabana. Like,
Yep.
It has nothing to do with that. Now, what it does have to do with is everybody wants to play there because those celebrities buying in and investing their time into somebody's music might launch their career, right?
That's
so
right.
if you're in that tier, that might be the extra push over the cliff you need. So for this sort of situation, what I do want to say is like, this is just indicative of the major market trend, which is that Gibson isn't the popular company that everyone thinks it is who plays guitar right now. Okay. This is not a shock. It shouldn't be a shock to anyone. And this doesn't mean anything new. The fact that Gibson was basically absent just means that right now people aren't using those sorts of sounds. Now, I think it's really, really funny that some of the forum conversation stuff, like I read a thing on the Gear page talking about, well, guitar is in its clean state or whatever right now, and people are preferring single coils and overdrive. And it's like, that has nothing to do with it. I know people are like, oh, it's just clean or whatever. It has nothing to do with it. This is a very aesthetic driven choice nowadays. And for a lot of people, maybe the tone of a single coil might be something that they want. But like, there was a time when a single coil through a fuzz pedal was seen as a shitty farty kind of sound, and nobody liked it. And that would have been post Jimi Hendrix, and it was like Jimmy only used it because that's what was available to him, was kind of the thought process there. You talk to any salty dogs who've been around the block for a while, and they'll tell you, like, you would have much rather used a Rat, than a fuzz phase. So I don't hail from that. Like, I'm like, do what you want, make the sound you want to come out of your instruments. It doesn't matter to me. But I think that there's a lot of aesthetic choice being drawn here. Fender guitars look noticeably different than Gibson. I hate to say it, but I think a lot of younger people specifically look at Gibson as like the pre-1950s aesthetic, and then the 1950s aesthetic is the pro thing. So like, for example, why do you think Eastwood guitars is so damn popular right now? Because all they do is reissue like airline style guitars and stuff of that ilk, right? Stuff from that generation of instruments, Univox High Flyers and stuff like that. There's a reason why that exists, right? Like some company didn't get behind this idea because they were like, well, we got the rights to these guitars and we're just going to make them and hope they sell. No, they knew that they were going to sell. They knew that the whatever generation was coming up was going to buy into those sorts of designs. Reverend is another classic example, right? You don't see Reverend trying to make traditional shaped guitars, although they do make Tellys and Strat, they do make a Strat. They make Tellys and Strats, and I think they do have a Les Paul shape, but it's kind of similar. And they used to make the V, but the vast majority of what they were selling was very Telecaster oriented kind of body with some sharper angles on it and stuff like that. The reason why I'm pointing this out is because I would far more likely see a Reverend or a Fender. Well, we obviously saw tons of Fenders, right? A Fender or a Reverend or any of those guitars on a stage like that. The other thing you got to remember is the prices of vintage Gibson are stratospheric. And
that's right.
And for somebody performing at Coachella, remember, they haven't quite made it yet. Buying that $200,000 59 Les Paul is totally out of the realm of affordability for these people.
Yeah, I think even if you left out the vintage market and just stuck with the newer market, it's still considerably more money.
Yeah, but I will say this: Fender has a better artist relations program.
I'm not gonna disagree with you. I'm gonna say this, that the aesthetic thing, first of all, nobody was talking about the fact that there were a lot of guitar companies not represented there. And the decision to pick, and I'm not saying you're picking on Gibson. Gibson could, it's like saying you're picking on someone twice your size. It's not, it's funny. I'm just saying
I'm not
that,
picking on Gibson. I feel like this is just reality. This is just reality.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. I'm just saying that there were not as many PRSs there, if any. There were very few Ibanez there. There was very few Schecter there. It was really, and Schecter has been at these other events.
None of those guitars have the aesthetic that is the Fender 1950s like space age aesthetic, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's what we're going for. And there's, I don't know if anybody remembers the last time that looks were more important than sound, hair metal, but I do remember
that new metal for sure, 100%.
And new metal. Okay, that was the last time.
Pointy strats.
Right. Pointy strats. So we have this because there was hair metal and obviously new metal. So there's always a time when aesthetic overtakes. You mentioned Harry Styles. Harry Styles is not going to strap a guitar around his neck that doesn't go with his
outfit. Right, because he's a pop star.
That's exactly right. And there's nothing, look, if anybody thinks of putting him down for that, you're talking to a guy who's buying white stuff to go with his white Les Paul. That is not, that's not what I'm saying.
Well, you're not a pop star, Jim. Like, I'm just going to put that out there.
And you're right. But I am saying that I'm doing the aesthetics thing. I'm not sitting here putting somebody down for doing the aesthetic thing for any amount of money or reason. I'm just saying that Machine Gun Kelly isn't playing a guitar that doesn't go with his nail polish. Okay, so and his, he goes at Karen's R Us to buy clothing. Nothing wrong with that if he wants to look like a 30-year-old guidance counselor, but whatever. I mean, it's his aesthetic, and that's cool, and that's his thing. And I'm just saying that there's nothing wrong with that, but as soon as the backlash comes, it's just like, I remember we talked to Michael Bedio. He was thrown in that category of there's hair metal and it's all aesthetic and it's blah, blah, blah.
Despite the fact that he had a band before that was not even that aesthetic at all. Holland, by the way.
And that's where, unfortunately, at that point, the talent and the sound got mixed up with that. George Lynch got thrown into that.
Dude, all right. So I'm going to have to interrupt because I want to share something with you. You mentioned George Lynch. I've been down this George Lynch tirade, and I almost made it a topic tonight, but we're not going to do the topic, but I am considering, because I've been looking for a book that already does this, but like considering researching and writing a book about the Strip during the time when Van Halen and Quiet Riot and George Lynch's various bands before he took off were all playing basically adjacent to one another, sometimes on the same bills. And so the reason why I want to write this is because there's so many stories that each of them tell that like Eddie Van Halen refused to admit that he was showing up at these backyard jams and playing with George Lynch. But George Lynch says, no, that was definitely happening. And there are other people who've corroborated that. And like that there was a big rivalry between all of these guys. And it's like nobody wanted to admit that there was a rivalry, but there definitely was. Okay. And I really want to write a book about it because I feel like this is like lost history. And it's really important to the music that I like. I like because it's almost a parody of itself, but I think that it's culturally relevant, and I would rather write this book when you can get interviews with some of the people that were alive when it happened. Like, for example, the guys like that George owned Lynch. Gazzari's and all the different clubs that were down there. It would be nice to be able to like get in touch with some of those people and sit down with them and ask them about their experiences with some of these different individuals. It would be
nice to talk to folks like George Lynch and Kip Winger and All these guys that were Paul Gilbert and Steve Vai and Joe Satriani.
So there are books that do that, but I want to specifically chronicle that area and that time period because it set up music for basically from 1977 to 1989. Everything that happened because of what happened in 1977 to 1979.
And I can tell you, so here I was, budding teenager. I turned teen in 77, right? And what was big in 1977? It was disco.
Yeah, and then Van Halen 1 came out.
Van Halen broke it. I mean, it literally broke its back. It was Bane to Batman. It just snap. And it was overnight. People wanted to hear Van Halen or they wanted to hear Leonard Skinner, and it was just you couldn't get enough of either that Southern country rock style thing, which was a guitar thing all of its own, or, and I'm talking about, I know Leonard Skinner existed before that, but it was like boom, and then you had Van Halen and all the stuff that came after that, kaboom, it just exploded, and people were burning records and oh, these guys suck so bad, and I would never listen. And the Bee Gees couldn't sell lollipops at a roadside stand.
Yeah, their career was basically destroyed all in one fell swoop, and it all happened all at once. It was like everything came crashing down all at once. And I've always believed that was because of Van Halen, but there was a lot of other things that influenced that. And it's interesting because like there's another whole aesthetic that basically lacked Gibsons, and it was a revolt against what was before it. And Gibsons were not popular in the disco scene either. They were popular with the lounge rock acts that sort of like they were pop acts, but they were like, they weren't disco, but they were like in that same era of something like was it Atlantic Sound Machine and stuff like that. There were different bands that were around at that time.
The yacht rock of the time, yeah.
Basically, yeah, we call it yacht rock now, but back then it was just pop rock with, and that pop rock, it actually was rock,
It literally was lounge lizard music is what it was called, lounge lizard. And the honest truth of that time, if you saw a person playing Gibson, was probably a jazz guy.
Yeah. And I don't recall. I mean, it's like really, so if you think about it and you want to popularize and think about who made Gibson popular, there's a handful of folks, right? So like
very small.
There's, Les Paul himself. And I'm not saying that these are the only people that used Gibson, but like
right.
These are the ones that sort of nailed it home. And I'm not even going to put Clapton in this because even though Clapton was like one of the first guys to latch onto it, I think Jimmy Page. Was one of the most important because I mean look at he's in Led Zeppelin and like from 1969 where their first album came out like 1969 1970 from 1970 to like what 1980 they split in like 82 was all Jimmy Page with the Les Paul, right? Even though we know now that and we knew back then some people did that it was a Telecaster in a lot of cases. And 335s and Stratocasters and other things that he was using in the studio. But like when you went to see him live,
on stage,
it was Les Paul's, right?
It was on stage. And that movie, what was the name of the movie?
Sound Remains the Same.
Sound Remains the Same. That was Les Paul's.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to think of is like who after them was that big slinging Les Pauls. The
next one that kind of Jimmy Page was on his peak, and you had Frampton. Frampton Comes Alive.
Yeah, that's true. Frampton was big into Gibsons, but he did a lot of other stuff too. Hammers. And...
Oh yeah. But see, the thing is, the album cover had what? Had a Les Paul, and it had that Black Beauty.
Sure.
Right, the Phoenix, and which it wasn't at the time. It wasn't the Phoenix at the time because it hadn't been burned. And then who kept Les Paul's going? It was very small number of people. It's always been a small, whether it was Cheap Trick before the Hamer days. What was it? It was. You look at the cover of the Live at Budokan, which is the penultimate. It was the first big and really the penultimate Cheap Trick album, and that's.
Well, that's because Cheap Trick was never like an A-list band. That
Right.
like I think a lot of people in my generation sort of have that kind of mixed up because they list Cheap Trick as like
were.
they were always sort of a fringe or like cult band that like people
Yep.
almost like the Ramones. They got shared around with the really cool people, but it wasn't like you weren't going to turn on the radio and hear like the new Cheap Trick single. That just didn't happen.
That's right. Tom Schultz with Boston.
So the reason why I would point the finger at Boston and say no is because Boston only had the 2 albums for like 30 years, right? So like they may have
had 3. That third one is forgettable, but
you spawned over 30 years because they did 1 and then they did 2 and then there was like 30 years later they did 3.
No, it was 20 years. It was about 20 years. It was
whatever. You get the point. By the time they pushed the third one out, like no one cared, you know.
And you know what? Every one of the albums, though, what was the thing on the album? It was a Les Paul that was shaped like a UFO, and it was
the art is so bad that like nobody even realized it. You know what I mean? Like until somebody points it out, you're like,
on the first album, those are Les Pauls. Oh wow, they are.
Well, I'll be damned.
But you had hard rockers, really hard rockers that were still doing it, and it was still those fringe guys. The guys from again, that's where when I saw my first Les Paul, that was not like Jimmy Page. It was freaking REO Speedwagon. And, he was, Gary Richrath was a whole all in Les Paul player. Thin Lizzy, Les Paul, when I was seeing him, not to say they didn't use Strats because they did. Gary Moore is very famous for that.
Yeah.
And then, the Foreigner guys, Mick Jones played a Les Paul. He played a Les Paul custom. And even some of the, believe it or not, because if you're a pop guy like I was, you were watching TV, and this is where I think Gibson isn't dropping the ball. We had these shows back then. They were TV shows because it was pre-MTV era, and you'd have these TV shows that were like, they'd show a band, and they were usually miming their music. But whether it was the Sweet doing Ballroom Blitz, or it was what's his name doing Magnet and Steel or whatever, they were playing Les Pauls. And it's funny because you didn't know if they were actually, no one thought about whether or not the stuff was
right.
That kept the aesthetic alive. It was like, this is a pretty guitar. It's a for television guitar. Because in those days, you still had dress codes for a lot of things, and being on TV and being on in certain things meant you dressed up, and it was part of the, oh look, I'm part of the in crowd, I'm part of the upper crust.
Let me ask you a question, because I think you're onto something, but we're not thinking like we should be about this. Okay, Coachella is not aimed at people our age, even our age. I'm 37, and I would be very old at Coachella.
Yeah, you'd be one of the old guys. You'd be an okay boomer.
So that's what I'm getting at here. Okay, so this is why I bring this up. In order for and this is like an awakening for a lot of people. They don't realize this. In order for an artist to get a record company to push them, they either have to have had 20 years of hits, right, or they have to be young. And you're not going to get, so I'm 37, I got a new band. There's no way in hell I will ever have any sort of major label interested in what I'm doing. No way. You never going to
only have independent. That's right.
Because I'm too old. Okay. Yep. And actually, like, my whole band is too old. And I'm comfortable with that. It doesn't bother me in one bit. In fact, it gives me more freedom. I can do whatever I want and not give a shit. Which is inspiring to me. But so this is where things get interesting, right? So if we're talking about Coachella and these young kids that are playing Fenders, what does this tell us about the market? This tells us a very specific thing. The only people, or the only guitars that young people are buying are Fender and Fender aesthetic, right?
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
So here's the problem, and we've said this on this show multiple times. How does Gibson expect to capture that market? because they have done nothing, literally nothing in a decade to capture that market. In fact, they named a brand ambassador from a band that was in their heyday in 1989.
Yep.
Okay. They have,
we said at the same time.
They have, their other guy is Joe Bonamassa, which is literally a museum of their guitars going around. Like, it couldn't get more bogus than that for a young generation. It's like, here's this fucking mobile museum, right? Like, what
outside of their own channel, the only YouTuber that really covers Gibson for the most part is who?
Probably Trogley.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, I you know what? I don't think that's necessarily completely true, but and I don't have a hatred of Gibson guitars. Like, I want to make this real clear to everyone. Me
either.
Well, that's obvious, Jim. Like, thanks for stating the obvious. Shit. He's got $11,000 at minimum of Gibsons hanging behind him. So anyway, point is, when you stop and you evaluate, you know, what level of effort's being put out here, I mean, there was something Gibson did recently where I was like, okay, now I can see them trying to aim themselves a little bit more directly at young people. But so even like Gary Clark Jr., right? And some of the people they're signing up these blues rock guys that are now Gary Clark is a little bit more than a blues rock guy, but they're signing up these people that are very like focused on their target market instead of looking. And they had people that appealed to younger generations in bands like Mastodon and stuff like that. And they let those relationships die on the vine, which is dangerous. Okay, so that was a big, huge mistake that I think that they're doing better, but not as fast as they should be. And I have a theory. So go ahead. Do better. So obviously in the Jeskowitz era, they did a terrible job with artist relationship. Not bad, terrible, horrible job. People were literally slamming them in public, burning their bridges. There was a while when you'd see Guitar World, Guitar One, Guitar Player, and if there was a new person on the cover, whether it was Puddle of Mud or whoever, it was a PRS or a Gibson, and that's what you saw. You didn't see Fenders on there for the most part, if it was a new band. So that is like you said, Mastodon, and there was another band like that, Opeth or somebody. Anyway, it was huge stuff. And they had great relations, and they tarnished those relationships. That is hard to bring back. If you screwed me over, if I'm them, and you've screwed me over in the past, and you walk back in, let's say you're the Mastodon guys, and they send their new guy out there, and it's, hey, I'm with Gibson, but I want to try to mend bridges. Yeah. Are you gonna mend those bridges? Probably not. Not the way I've heard they were screwed over. So yeah. All I'm saying is that I think that there's going to be a little while, just like in the 80s, when nobody wanted a Gibson. That we're going to have another lull. But the thing is, it's just Gibson is kind of like that car that you can't afford, and finally you can, and you get one, or the motorcycle, or the whatever, and you finally get one. For some people, not everybody. I think that's a very specific group of people that are much older than the target audience they need to be gunning for. I don't see young people looking at that brand anymore as that's desirable. That's a grandpa's guitar. That's what they would say. The one thing I can say about young people, and it's only the ones that this is very, what do they call it when it's only the things you see? There's a word for that. Narrow-minded? No. No, it's I know what you're saying. That you only get when you're the one that sees them, or you're the one that experiences them. There's a word for that. But anyway, I have evidence, but okay. No, I'm saying that when I would sit in the store and I would, young people, 12 to 18, early 20s, guys that just joined the Navy, so on and so forth. And they'd come into the store, and I'd say, well,
well, I can't afford a Gibson. It wasn't I don't like Gibson or I don't want a Gibson or it was always I can't afford that, or that's way outside of my price range, or that's something I could never get into. And so there is still a group of people who are looking to find that point. I'm not saying that it's huge numbers.
I don't think, well, that's my point, is like, I don't think that's a big enough target audience for them to somehow capitalize on that. Because they don't they don't even think about the fact that their price bracket puts them out of the realm of affordability for people who are younger, who might actually grow into buying the expensive stuff later. By using that Epiphone label, that's a stigma. Like, I know people, they don't want to say it. They don't want to say it, but it is a stigma. It's not Gibson. And there are a ton of people that do that thing where they're like, it's not a real Gibson, I'm not playing it. Yeah. Like, and I get it. I you know what? I get it. Like, you don't want to have those conversations with people in the audience, and you don't want to have to answer to yourself because you're like, I really am not good enough for a Gibson kind of conversation and that kind of thing.
Yep, it's always this thing that you will never get past. It's like a GMC and a Chevy.
Right. I mean, it's not the same thing. It is the same thing, but it's not the same thing because there's a different label on it.
That's absolutely, you are 100% correct on that. There is no doubt. I don't care if you're 12, 20, or 52. You look at that Epiphone as a lesser guitar.
You know what's funny? Is I actually have, and I don't know whether it's a marketing thing that's caused this, but I have less of a gut reaction to owning a Squier than owning an Epiphone. Like, I could buy a Squier and play it, but buying an Epiphone and playing it, I don't know. I mean, I would have a lot. I would feel a lot more challenged to do that. And I did have some of that stigma with PRS too. I don't have it anymore. Once I realized that most of the parts on my guitar are basically the same as what's in an SE, it's kind of like, why the hell did I buy a S2 then? It's like, why does S2 even exist?
Yeah, that's kind of a weird market position.
So
to me,
that's the weird thing. So just to take it back for a second and talk about like when I was a kid and how all this worked, like the new metal crowd was very into Gibsons. There was a lot of guys playing Les Paul. What do they call them? They were like a flat top Les Paul, but they were double humbuckers, like I forget what they were called. They weren't juniors. Maybe they were juniors, pro juniors or something.
Yeah, I think that Junior Deluxe or Pro Junior or something like that, where it's got two. It's the flat top, but it's got the two.
They weren't studios. They were a flat top Les Paul with a pair of 85.
Why don't they do that more? And why, when they do it, do they put such a price tag on it? I saw on Trogley today, they had one that was a junior. It was like $4,000. Like, first of all, why? How? It's a set neck telly. Come on, get yourself in that.
If Gibson wanted to sell Les Pauls right now, just some sort of Les Paul shape to get it in people's heads again, what they should do is do a Les Paul Junior, double P90s, maybe even triple P90s, okay, with a pick guard in light colors, pastel, kind of car colors from the 50s. Go toe to toe with Fender and say, hey, look, we know you like single coils, so we're giving you P90s. And we're giving you, the Gibson quality that you've come to expect. Maybe even put a feature or something in there that would appeal to them, like a built-in tuner or something. Because I know people like, it's so silly, but like some stupid feature, and make it so you could take it out of the guitar too. So if you're an old person, you just want the color, you take it out, right? No big deal.
And you know what? Here's in the who gives a shit what the old guy thinks category. Right. Fuck it. Put the goddamn tuner right where you have it on acoustic. Put it. This one doesn't have one. I don't know why I'm pointing it to it. Put a fucking tuner in it, right? And put it right where you would on acoustic, right there on the bout. Put a tuner right there. You have the room.
Now, I will say some stuff that it's going to be pretty controversial because I think Gibson actually does care about this market. I don't think Gibson knows how to market to them. Okay.
That might be.
And I'll explain why. Because I think Gibson is sort of like, they're looking at the situation and going, we can't compromise our core brand values. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for the next Slash. Hoping that that's going to happen. I'm not convinced that is going to happen. Okay. Because there isn't a heyday of guitars that are affordable for people to idolize. And actually, quite frankly, that didn't exist when Slash picked up the famous Les Paul that was used for Appetite for Destruction, which is why he had somebody build him one. So just keep that in mind. Well, like
he didn't have it built. It was built, and his
I thought he commissioned it by the guy.
Somebody got it from somebody that. In other words, he kept like, no, I don't like that one. I don't like that one. I don't like that one. And they brought him in a Les Paul, didn't tell him it was a fake. And he played it. And he loved it. Mm-hmm. And I guess he stole an amp that was blown to him for there's a whole lot of stories that go on with that. But the point
now belongs to George Lynch.
Yeah, I think so.
There's the Lynch connection.
Yep. And I think the big and important thing that you see in that thing is that he got that stuff given to him. Why? Because they had a recording contract. Mm-hmm. They saw the people that had the money were throwing stuff at him.
He didn't buy it.
He didn't have any money.
That was the advance money from the recording company, Geffen Records.
When I listened to Paul Stanley's book, this is the thing about Gibson's that's tough. To be a fan and be a lover of it and know these kinds of things. When I read Paul Stanley's book, they were playing shit, and then when they got the recording contract, they got the advance. That's when they got the nice guitars. And you read about that with a lot of these companies. Not everybody can be Tom Schultz, and your father is like a genius and an engineer, and you've got tons of money. Or like I saw this one kid, I don't remember the punk band. I shared it on my Facebook page a while back, but I was like, Rock's Still Not Dead. And this kid, his mother or his aunt is the woman that makes the straps. Starts with a J, but they're very expensive straps. And they're the only ones he uses, and he wears nudie suits, and he's got all kinds of expensive stuff. You know there's money in that family. Not everybody has that money, and not everybody has that ability. Open letter to Gibson. Make a flat top, easy to construct, easy to sell. Like you said, pastel flat colors that can be popularized. 1, 2, and 3 pickup models of guitars, and put the goddamn Gibson name on them and get them out there.
And well, the other thing is you can't just do that. You have to focus on it. Like that's the problem that they have right now. Is that they're so focused on trying to clean up their image from what HJ has done that, I mean, literally I don't have the pin sitting here. Do I? I think I do. They literally printed up pins saying, I support the new Gibson. Like, think about that for a minute. They're admitting that the old Gibson sucked. And so like, they're so worried with that brand image shift that they forgot to realize, like, you guys are headed for disaster if you're not careful. Because your customer base is rapidly dwindling. And I'm not just talking about money, but I'm just talking about, like, once they're gone, you know? You got
to wonder if the investors give a rat's ass. The truth of the matter is that
I'm an investor. I mean, I'm first to admit it. I got money in there in the holding company. Like, I know that. So the outlook is good, but I think it's one of those things where they're bundled in a portfolio with like 50 other things. And so because of that, like, it doesn't really matter if Gibson does well or not. It's whether the overall picture is doing well.
That's right. And there's got to be that level of, like you said, focus. Get those things, put them together, make them good, get them in the hands of young people. Not Joe Bonamassa. Don't care if Joe Bonamassa likes it. Don't
Right.
care if Marcus King or Mark, whatever that guy's name is, if he likes it. He's the blues guy. He's going to play a 3-3-5. His grandfather was a famous guy, and he played I don't give a shit
It's
about
not
that.
about your heritage.
Right.
We stopped caring about. I mean, they're still resting on the idea that what they did in 1957 is what's selling their guitars now. And
I was excited about the new Thunderbird until I saw how much it is. It's $2,800 because Gene Simmons' name is on it. I mean,
yeah, man.
You know, it's just ridiculous to me to think that a $1,600 or $1,900 guitar should be $2,800 and or bass.
I had the best answer for that in that thread too, because I said like I have to toot my own horn because I was like I'm incredibly proud of myself because I was like, you know, you guys think it's so great that Gene Simmons is this great businessman and whatever. I'm like, but like here he is putting his name on a guitar that basically only people with hugely disposable incomes can afford, and you know damn well he ain't gonna buy one because like he's either gonna get him given to him or he's not gonna use him at all because he's a tightwad. I mean, he'd be using Japanese copies for $1,000 if he could make it work. So
and then he'd sell it for $10,000.
Show played.
For a backstage pass. So those things. I mean, it's got to be done. And it's got to be done right. If Gibson wants to be seen in the future, as that company, and if they don't, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is that we're seeing that now. Coachella is not the Coachella, whatever you say. Coachella is not the only thing that is a barometer for the world of guitars. I'm just saying.
Can we switch to the next topic? This is a great segue.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I want to talk about the big four, and then this will be a perfect segue into Digitech. So we used to have the big three, right? Like we used to talk about Fender, Gibson, and PRS.
PRS, yep.
which is kind of wild because PRS sort of came out of left field. Fender started in the 50s. Gibson started
40s.
Gibson started long before that, but when they started introducing solid body guitars, it was in the 50s, and then nothing happened. Nothing changed. There were other players. There was Tokai and all these Japanese brands, and then there was Univox and Airline and Silvertone and all these different like mail order stuff. But realistically, there were two brands for like long ass time. And then the 80s hit, and you had Kramer, and you had Charvel, and you had Jackson, and then you had Ibanez suddenly like came out of nowhere, which is really, not out of nowhere. They were a bunch of brands in the 70s that were Japanese in origin. But my point is, like, all of a sudden you had this changing landscape where all these competing companies were actually like starting to rival the big two because the big two had rested on their laurels. And in Fender's case, they'd gotten just so many shitty like deals handed to them over time period, and the fact that CBS mismanaged the company so bad that they were basically a non-company, and at the same time, Gibson was literally having the same problems. They were mismanaged. They were poor quality because they were being mismanaged, and no one was playing them until like 1990.
Can I make an obvious statement? Then you can go on. Mm-hmm. Obvious statement. Gibson, Fender, they're both names. They were both people's names. Yeah. Family names. What happened after the families got out? Mismanaged. Yeah. I'm just saying. There's no ownership and love when the only people that own it is, I've got $25 worth of stock in there. Go ahead. I'm just stating the obvious.
You're right. So in the 80s, PRS starts making guitars out of his garage, really in the 70s, but in the 80s is when he started as a business. I was like 79 or something like that. And then grew fast because he was doing custom work that nobody had ever seen before. And then all of a sudden was super desirable amongst a group of musicians that they liked the Gibson sound. They liked the Gibson aesthetic, but they liked some of the Fender playability and that kind of thing. And so just suddenly sort of filled both niches for a lot of people. And by the mid 90s, PRS was booming. And by the time I became a guitar player in the early 2000s, PRS was You walked into the guitar store, and what did you see? Fender, Gibson, PRS, and you did still see Ibanez, but like Ibanez was the metal guitar, right? Like that was what you bought if you were playing metal. And of course there was ESP, LTD, and stuff like that, but those were a little bit more fringe brands, even back then.
Yep.
So
and Schecter was kind of coming of its own at that point.
Yeah, because Schecter had just gotten purchased by Guitar Center. So that was during a time period where they were owned by GC or had a major distribution deal through GC, and like GC was basically controlling them.
Right.
So anyway, now so you're sitting there and you're like Gibson, Fender, PRS for a long time, for like another 15 years, and I laugh because it's not actually true. So Gibson, Fender, and PRS had, with Fender specifically, right? And then all of the other tertiary brands that were import lines were made by basically one company, and that was Samick throughout the 90s, okay? Really until the early 2000s.
I owned a Samick.
Samick, World Music Industry, it's like World Music Instruments, where I think they were same company, WMI.
Yeah.
But Korea, right? Like that's basically, if a guitar came out of Korea, it came from one of those two companies on the back end, right? And so like, Japan still was making guitars. You had Fujigen and stuff like over there, but we weren't getting that stuff stateside. We don't get that stuff stateside now. Like if you go to Japan, there's tons of guitars that never see the light of day because they are specific to the island of Japan. They have a collector's market there, and they make guitars for their market. And like even Fender Japan has like a whole line of guitars that never make it to U.S. shores.
That's right.
So anyway, point aside. So you got three companies, and then you actually had a fourth. You had Samick for a while, and Samick got replaced by Cort. And Cort, if I recall, had facilities in Korea at first. It was
and then
was it Korea? Was it Korea or was it somewhere else?
Vietnam.
I know it ended up in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And that's why. So then they became Core Tech. When they built the new facility, they kind of rebranded as Core Tech. And Core Tech was the most advanced guitar production facility on the planet, and it was paid for by such brands as Ibanez, Fender.
It was sold South Korea.
Yeah, so they moved from South Korea, but because manufacturing was getting expensive, labor was getting expensive, they took and built a state-of-the-art facility, probably better than what anybody, maybe except for Bob Taylor, has in the United States, for mass-producing guitars in Indonesia. They trained people. It is the most high-tech guitar facility on the planet. And they churn out pretty much anything from Indonesia. Not pretty much. Literally every guitar from Indonesia is coming from Cort Tech. To the point where, I mean, Cort is really basically just Fender, and like the Cort brand is literally just like an amalgamation of everything else they make. And so we don't think of them this way, right? As being a guitar company. But I'm here to argue, and this is why this segment is called The Big Four, is that Core Tech today is currently number 4. Okay? It is PRS, Fender, Gibson, and Core Tech. And
doesn't Core Tech, am I wrong? I thought Core Tech made the SE models.
They do.
Okay.
They do now. The WMI did. And my understanding was that Paul worked with WMI to make some custom tooling, some very expensive custom tooling, and that WMI was supposed to be exclusive for PRS, and then they sort of started using some of that tooling to make guitars for other people, and so PRS kindly said, "Get wrecked," and moved over to Core Tech. There was a time period where all the European distribution came out of WMI. I think it was 1 year. And everything else was coming from Core Tech, and now everything is over at Core Tech now. So,
gotcha.
There was,
what I thought,
which is weird because there was like a time period where Europe actually had different specs because they just everything else came out of Core Tech. Now, here's the interesting part, right? It's like Gibson has a pedal line now, Fender has a pedal line, PRS doesn't, but PRS does have an amplifier line, which Gibson doesn't, right? Not currently. It's coming. Right. Summer NAMM is in a few weeks. I expect a big announcement.
I expect to hear about the Gibson amps anytime now.
Yeah. And then the other company, of course, like Fender, they have both amps because they were an amp company first. They have both amps and they have pedals now. And it's funny because the pedal lines are new for both these companies, even though they built pedals in the past. Like they didn't have them for a while. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is because they also manufacture accessories. Fender and Gibson have sort of crossed over into being lifestyle brands. PRS a little bit, but not nearly as much as Fender and Gibson. Like you can buy PRS t-shirts and mugs and keychains and that kind of stuff, but you're not going to be going in, or maybe even shot glasses and that kind of thing. But you're not going to be able to go to PRS and buy a jukebox.
Right.
Or dog leashes.
Or a cooler for your, you got to have a refrigerator.
I wanted to make this a topic, but I didn't. I think we can talk about it in like 2 or 3 minutes. Did anybody see the new Fender Lifestyle shit? Jesus, Tim, man. I know I sent you that. Yeah, what the hell?
That was
so
crazy.
They signed a deal with Wrangler jeans. And if you go look at the stuff, like the clothing they're selling right now, the aesthetic is like, what the hell? And it's even better because it like the models they have wearing it are like totally people would never wear that stuff.
It's almost like they're saying, hey Gibson, you got the guy from Levi's at your thing. How come you don't have Gibson?
Exactly what it was.
Jeans. And
it was a big middle finger. Yeah.
It's right on the front. By the way, if you go to Fender's site, you don't have to search. It's literally the first thing you see. Pioneer music and denim for 75 years. First of all, whoever thought Fender guitar?
I would think Levi's would want to sign a deal with Fender, to be quite frank. They seem more iconic, right?
Right. Wrangler is kind of, I got to be honest with you, it almost fits because Wrangler is kind of the lesser brand. Wrangler's the poor man's Levi's.
Well, no. So the funny part is that Levi's are not made in the States anymore. Wrangler is.
No. Which is funny.
Wild, right? Because everybody sees Wrangler as the lesser brand, but from what I've heard, their quality is like 100% better than Levi. And I wear Levi's a lot of the time, but I bought Levi's since they left the States. That's true. I used to buy Levi's 80s, 90s. I think it was early 2000s when they left the States. And I saw Made in China or something on there, and I went, they're made in Vietnam or something like that now.
Not that I'm above wearing Made in China clothes. I've got a.
But you're paying the same price.
This was a Wrangler shirt.
But Jim, you're paying the same price for clothing made in a foreign country by people probably in sweatshops.
$47 for a pair of jeans made by somebody
in a sweatshop. I mean, that's kind of messed up. So
now, don't get me wrong. First of all, I love the clothing stuff that Fender does done right.
Oh, it's don't you want that fringe jacket, Jim?
No,
I'm not going to spend.
How much is the fringe jacket?
Oh, all of their clothing items are really expensive. The t-shirts are like $50.
Yep, $189 for the jacket, the fringe jacket.
Yeah, I was like, what?
And that's the woman's. I don't know if the men's is more.
Who wears a fringe? Unless you're riding a motorcycle, 9 days a week, you're not wearing a fringe jacket. Let's just get real for a minute. So
I know because I have one, and it was from when I was riding a motorcycle.
No, but I'm just telling you, if you look at the what they're selling, it doesn't match the aesthetic of their brand at all.
No. It literally says high price. Sitting at Starbucks having coffee type stuff. It does not say to me.
Right. It just doesn't. It's not a good lifestyle product for them. Okay.
No.
So, and then the other thing is they have leashes and dog collars. Yep. And I'm like, really? I mean, come on. For one thing, you're going to get sued out your ass if somebody hurts their dog walking, because that's a whole thing now. Dogs are family members. You better be damn sure you are licensed and an authority on being able to do that and doing it correctly.
I'm looking at getting a miniature dachshund, by the way.
Oh yeah.
I cannot. I'm looking at this, the new lifestyle stuff, and I'm like, you are fucking kidding me. A turntable.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of makes sense.
Those MoFi
Legos.
turntables are like they're like $1,000 a piece.
Legos, more Legos. Okay, it's just the same Lego.
Right. So Gibson is not immune from doing stuff like this either, but like Gibson doesn't have a deal with Levi's. You know what I mean? Like you would think they would try to equal it out.
Well, I mean, didn't JC come from Levi?
Yeah, he was.
No,
that's why I said, wouldn't you think that he would go
yeah.
and try to like, I don't know. It's just a whole thing, and like, I just think it's funny that these lifestyle things exist. But notice Cortec can't do that, right? Because they don't have brand recognition to do that. However, I will point something out. There is another company that used to make copies of everybody else's guitars, and actually ended up starting to make guitars for some of these companies, because there was a time when Hoshino Gaki Fujigen was doing guitars for Fender, specifically for Fender, and that ended up getting taken over by somebody else. They got the official license, and they were importing those guitars to the United States. So for several years, the only Fenders sold here were made in Japan, and that whole like changeover. We're talking about Cortec, right? I mean, Cortec could be the next Ibanez. Like, I don't think people sort of see it that way, because right now they're the imitator. But if Cortec establishes a brand, and it isn't going to be Cort, let's just be real for a minute. It's not going to be Cort. They could potentially shift the market in their favor, and those contracts with Squier and the other companies aren't that important to them. Right now, that's a massive amount of cash for them. That is basically sustaining them. And I think they like the idea that they don't have to do the marketing. But I do have evidence that might change. And that'll be covered in the next segment. But I don't know what that means for the industry, right? If like Cortec is really interested in becoming the next part of the big three, first off, they're going to have to crush Ibanez, because Ibanez is probably still hot on their tail, despite the fact that Ibanez, because that AZ line has been so big, and they've gotten so many names to support the AZ line. Like when I was a kid, they did have artists, right? But their artist repertoire was not anything like what it is today, where you go on their site and there's like 25 artists listed at the bottom of every page, and you're like, there are that many Ibanez artists, and then there's like 14 signature model guitars being made at every time. At all times, and you're just going, whoa, they're obviously still trying to grow. They're still trying to hold on to the industry tooth and nail, because there was a time period when Ibanez was probably outselling Fender. It wouldn't shock me, maybe like around new metal era. So I can remember when I was just starting out guitar, just to share an anecdote. A classmate of mine, I was in high school, and there was a classmate sat behind me, and he always had guitar magazines. And so like, I was interested in starting. I was like, what guitar would you recommend me to buy first? And he says, he said, don't buy a Squier. He said, buy an Ibanez. And I said, well, what's wrong with Squier? And he goes, he says, well, he's like, there's nothing really wrong with Squier, but Ibanez makes better stuff. And so I was like, oh. And so I kind of always kept that in the back of my head. Was it like Ibanez's entry-level stuff was probably better than Squier at that time. I think that's probably shifted now, but because and frankly, they're both made by the same damn people. So they were probably made by the same people then. It makes it interesting to think about how the industry has shifted. Now, I will point out one thing, which is that Samick tried to do this. Samick is a piano company. Like, let's just put that out there. They made all kinds of musical instruments, but they were making pianos, and that was their predominant seller. I don't think their pianos were super popular in the States, but they sold other musical instruments in the States and did really well, like organs, and I think they sold a lot of like band instruments, specifically like education market type items. So Samick tried to do this, and they had the Greg Bennett line of guitars. Before that, they had the Samick line of guitars, which is more like Cort, right?
Yep.
Then they had Greg Bennett. And Greg Bennett was this, like, if I recall, they billed him as being, like, a designer of popular guitars for, like, various other companies. And, like, he had come to Samick to create a line of guitars for them that was very forward-thinking. Do you remember the Greg Bennett line at all? Because I do.
Yeah, early 2000s.
God, they were ugly. They were all ugly. They had the wrong appointments in most of them, and it was like just a huge miss. It was like throwing rocks through a chain link fence. Okay, and I'm sure they played good, but it was like, guys, you should probably look at your competitors. And they weren't interested in doing that. Okay, and so the Greg Bennett line died fast. And so did Samick. It was almost as though like they were tied in together, and suddenly both of those companies sort of started to dry up, despite the fact they were still producing guitars for other companies. This was around the time that ESP Ltd. Took off because everybody was aware that they were being made in Korea. They had their own production facility and had their own like rules and regulations, and was being governed separately and was doing their own thing. Right. And people liked those. They still like those guitars. I mean, even now, the ESP Ltd stuff that was started back then is still pretty popular. So if it failed for them, how is Cortec going to do this differently? I think I already pointed it out, but we're going to go to the next. Go ahead. We're going to go into the next topic after your retort, and then I think it'll be pretty clear.
This is something I see Cortec, if they're going to do anything smart, right? Which you would think they would do things smartly. If I was Cortec, I'd just do what I'm doing. They're selling a lot of guitars by selling them with other brands stuck on the headstock, and then they've got their own brand. Their own brand quietly sits under here, but they still make a lot of sales over here. And pretty much, they probably charge the same amount of money. They just... Paul Reed Smith adds a little bit extra on there, and it's sold for a little more money. So I don't think Cortec is going to make any changes on that front.
I do.
I think they're going to keep their guitars going as they are. Cort.
I look for this is my tenure for Cort. Okay.
Sure.
Cortec is the advanced manufacturing facility now. I can almost guarantee you that within the next 10 years, China is going to start spinning up a facility that probably rivals Cortec, if not is more advanced. And will be taking contracts from companies like Epiphone, and because they already have Epiphone in China.
Yep, they've already got it.
I suspect that you'll see PRS being made there as well, and also Fender and other companies. Now, PRS will hold out as long as they can because they want to resist the stigma of being we're in China now. Because they had the same problem. Like they stayed in Korea despite the fact that if they'd gone to Cortec, they probably would have saved more money and increased the quality. So it was a whole other thing. I would say right now, Indonesian guitars are superior to what Korea was doing 10 years ago. That's how good they've gotten because of the new facility and the way it's all being run. However, that's at the mercy of your contract with them. So if you're not paying for good quality control, you're not going to get it. Okay.
Yep.
So it's reflected in price. Like, it's the same thing we've always said. Like, a $500 guitar is not going to be as good as a $1,000 guitar. It doesn't matter whose name is on the label.
Right.
It's just they're selling it at a cost, and that cost is associated with, and generally there's not a huge premium unless you're one of the big four on the name, right? Well, in this case, it'd be one of the big three because Cort obviously doesn't get that premium. So, I'm going to hit the next topic button because we're going to just get right into it. I think Cortec's 10-year strategy involves acquiring other companies, specifically companies where they can wear their brand label like a skin. Okay, so they would rather just say we're not Cort anymore. I'll just throw a name out there. We're Strandberg. I'm not saying they're going to acquire Strandberg, but that would be a good acquisition for them because they're making all the Strandbergs anyway. So it would make sense if they were to be like, you know what? Hey, I think it's Uli Strandberg, right? Is the guy
Right.
that I think it's Uli Strandberg. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments below. Uh, let's make him an offer he can't refuse. We'll buy your business from you. We'll buy your patent. We'll license your patent, and we'll bring you on as a designer, and pay you X amount of dollars per year for your company for the next 10 years. If we get to take control of it, basically we own it. And I think people like Uli Strandberg would be like, dependent upon the amount of money that are offered, be like, yeah, I mean, you're already making all the guitars anyway. Like, sure. And then I get to stay doing the engineering side. And, it's like, yeah, absolutely. They would definitely take that deal. And then that means they can distribute it. And in fact, Cortec can actually go to Uli and say, you know what? We got to hit a lower price point. Design me a guitar that's cheap. And, we'll set the quality guide. And because there's an internal contract now, there's not all this overhead. They can afford to drop the price on this stuff, get it out the door at a higher quality level than the competitors they're already competing with. And Fender, and here's the thing, this could never have happened when Samick was doing it, because Samick, there were other companies competing with Samick. Cortec doesn't have competition. Like, I want to make that very, very clear to everyone. Samick had, WMI and stuff like that. They had the ESP guys that were building for them. And, of course, Epiphone was still in China. Like, where's Fender and Squier going to go? Right? Where are they going to go? They don't have a choice.
Right.
So Cortec could say, yeah, we're going to make Strandberg. We're going to make Strandberg more popular than your guitars. We're going to make them at a lower price, and we're going to beat you as a competitor. And Fender just has to sit there and go, okay, what choice do we have? In fact, since it's an international agreement, there may not even be any legal recourse for them getting screwed. So that's a whole other conversation. I don't think Cortec wants to create ill will like that. I think they would look for a band like Strandberg that doesn't have the crossover potential for their big contracts. Who would they be competing with? Like, Strandberg is kind of its own thing. It wouldn't be like buying, I'm trying to think of somebody who makes like Squier like guitars and buying G&L. Right? I don't think it could do that anyway, but like if they were to buy G&L and they're like, we're going to pump out, basically Stratolikes using the G&L proprietary parts, and we're going to charge 10% less than the Squiers and give them higher quality because we can do that. You know what I mean? Like, that would be a dangerous thing. But there is evidence to support that they may already be starting to think in this direction, because they acquired a company. They bought Digitech. Digitech has been on the market since 2017. And when we did the episode last week talking about the demise of Digitech, we had no idea who had actually stepped to purchase them. Jim and I had talked on the side and assumed it would be Gibson. And it's not Gibson. It's Cortec.
Cortec.
They announced it yesterday, 4/23, so April 23rd. It was announced by Cortec that the decision had been made for Cortec to purchase Digitech effective immediately. So it's not really clear. I think that's why all this stuff started shipping again, was because that deal was made last week and Cortec already issued the order. Just go ahead and ship everything. They probably wanted to do a big official announcement, and it was taking too long, and it had leaked. And so by that point, it was like, well, we'll just tell people we did it, and then we'll have the big official thing at NAMM, because that's probably where it's going to be unveiled, like what they're going to do with the company, right? Because it's not really clear at this point. They said they look forward to having a long partnership with a successful line of products that are highly thought of and legendary in the industry. Which you can read that to mean the Whammy is still going to exist. It may be a Whammy 6. They may revamp products. You will probably see reissues of DoD stuff. It's good news, right? Because they're not going to be overly expensive. Cord is not in the business of designing products that are super expensive. And it gives a beloved brand new life. And it gets them out from under Samsung. And I actually hope that Cortec is smart enough to go back and get some of the designers that were let go in 2017. Because when that happened, they had some of the best products they'd ever built. They were going through a renaissance, and Samsung came in and said, "Get the hell out." It didn't make sense. It was like, that's why everybody kind of reacted like, this is madness, because it was. So Cortec buying Digitech, Digitech surviving, right? And in the face of these comments, like we're talking about the big four, I think this is Cortec starting to look at how can we start to infringe upon the people we're building for but not infringe upon the people we're building for. You know what I mean?
Exactly right. Yep. And that's where they have to tread lightly, because if they step too hard on toes, they're going to do what Samick wound up doing, is cutting off their nose to spite their face.
I don't think anybody's going to look at a Digitech acquisition from Cortec as like a shot across their bow.
No.
But they have to play their cards very close, and I would not be surprised if they don't buy a little fish guitar company next. And if they don't buy, or maybe they get into an accessory company like Monocase. Like they buy somebody that, you know, that has attachments to the South Pacific, which is where their base of operations has been, where they can start to produce a product that, you know, is another niche product for the industry that diversifies their portfolio. I also think this is a long-term strategy for Cortec to survive guitar manufacturing shifting to China. I think they realize their days are numbered. I think they realized when they opened Cortec, with all the new production facility equipment and all the things that they put into that to make it work, I think they realized they had a 10-year lifespan. They've gotten 12, I think, 12 or 13. So I sort of suspect that they are sort of kind of anxiously waiting to see what China does in the next 5 years, and that they are hedging their bets. And they realize that, you know, we can't compete with Chinese labor costs and efficiency right now. And ultimately, China won't be able to compete with some other third world country eventually. I mean, it's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah, I think that if they're able to hold on long enough, Indonesia is still probably a good bet in the long term. It's just that China's willing to do a lot of stuff to subsidize, to bring, and this is known, they'll subsidize the company to make it more to undercut long enough. That's what Walmart did when they first came out. You'll notice Walmart's no better than Target's no better than anybody else, right? But when you first got a Walmart, and you're, oh wow, look at that, the prices are better. Of course,
that's part of their long-term growth strategy was to run other companies out of business, so that
run them into the dirt.
Yeah,
and then they have no ability to compete at all.
Well, that's what
they can't get product. Because they can't.
The socioeconomic implication of this is if China takes it on, they have a ticking time bomb too, because at some point they have to raise prices because the education level in China is going up, which means that eventually people are going to be saying, hey, I'm worth more than that. And China has to be very, very careful about that because they're communist.
And I'll ask you a dumb question real quick. So this is a fact question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but how much did you pay for your whammy that you've got?
$220 shipped.
Shipped, $220. Right now, if you want to get one from Sweetwater, and it's $270. And tax. Now, I got my drop pedal, 140 something shipped. They are right now $239.
And that's the retail price, by the way. So we figure, and I still think this is true, that Gear for Music in the UK bought the last lot of what they thought were the last lot of Digitech stuff, and then offered it at discounted prices, thinking they were going belly up. Being allowed to do that because Digitech they're not going to pursue any pricing agreement if they're going out of business, and they may have even gotten express permission to do so. And at the end of the day, guess what happened? They're not going out of business, but that agreement is probably still null and void.
Yep, because those didn't come from
Right.
Digitech.
They came from Harman. They came
Harman
from Harman.
Kardon.
So
And so you're looking at is it Harman Kardon?
it's Harman. Just Harman.
It's just Harman now. Okay. So you figure that's an agreement they had with Harman. Harman doesn't care. So they're able to keep those blown out. So if you're looking for one of these, I still go for Gear for Music.
Yeah, for sure.
They haven't jacked their prices yet.
They haven't even. I mean, the prices are discounted from what they were. They're $50 less than what they normally were.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a deal right now, head over to Gear for Music and just buy whatever Digitech products that you can get at discounted prices, and be happy that you can get them at that price. You know what is really cool? Because we talked about we had that episode, I think it was about 6 months ago, when we were talking about the proprietary nature of a lot of the Digitech communication protocols. I look for there to be another trio with the built-in looper, and I look for them to put in actual MIDI, and I think that they'll have the loop that you'll see the Jam Man line come back this time with actual MIDI, and
I have a Jam Man.
It'll be really, really cool when we see those products come back. I also think they're going to take the engine out of the whammy. I think it's very likely we're going to see an intelligent harmonizer.
Right.
Using the whammy's ability to shift pitches. Now, it's been said that even the current whammy was developed by a third party. So I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Have a hard time believing that, given the folly that they can't reissue the WH1. And but that company was kind of mismanaged for a really long time before the Renaissance, so it wouldn't shock me. But even Josh Scott was doing JHS did their video about the greatest Digitech pedal you didn't even know about. And
right.
So this was being felt in the pedal world. Like, it was, people were like, damn, like, this is a big damn deal, because it'd be like MXR going under, right? Because they were that big for that long. So I'm very, very happy to hear that they got acquired. I hope that they either have some level of autonomy, or that Cortec is a good shepherd of the brand, which I think is probably going to be the case, just because they seem to understand the industry pretty well. Like, they, from a business perspective and how they've worked, like they've done a really good job of working with other brands and not pissing each other off. Because you don't get the sense that, like, G&L is mad that Squier is made at Cortec, even though they're both made there. Tributes are made there, and Squires are made there. So, like, I think that's a really interesting situation. Could you imagine, like, if and I'm trying to think of a similar situation. What if Ford and GM were not actually built by Ford and GM, but they were built by Company Y? And Company Y built both vehicles in the same facility. Okay. Could you imagine the kind of pissing match that would be going on right now with the supply shortages and stuff? Like, about who gets what? It would just be a nightmare. And Cortec manages to navigate all that. So they obviously understand brand relations very well. And they obviously understand how to build quality products, because you don't hear about the failure rate anymore. It used to be that you would hear like 2 out of every 10 guitars coming out of whatever country were getting rejected by the dealer, which you don't hear about that anymore. I do know that I've seen Cortec guitars locally get rejected. I can't put a number on how many out of how many, but it happens, right? Like, they come out of the box and they have orange peel. There's stuff that happens in shipping. In some cases, there are quality control issues that should have been caught at the factory. They just make it through. But realistically, the failure rates are really low compared to what they used to be. So, it's just, I'm not mad that Digitech has been purchased by Cortec. I'm not upset in the least. I'm happy to see the brand continue. It doesn't make any difference to me where it's produced or who's, like, actually making it. Because let's face it, like, how many people do we all know that are running Moore pedals on their board? Or they're running Joyo, or, any of the other Chinese brands. This is going to be no different than that. except I suspect it will probably still be engineered here in the States and it would not shock me if it's not done by the people that used to run DoD Digitech.
Yeah. Yeah. Me
So
either.
anyway, so
Well,
let's, are you ready to go over the gig report, or you got more to say?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm ready.
All right. You have a big gig report. I know you do because you've been talking about it all episode. So I want to hear your gig report. This is really important to me, Jim. So let's go.
Yeah. So we had a 2-day gig, Friday, Saturday. I had to take day off because it wasn't local. It was 2 hours away, and it was noon. So both days it was noon to 2. Outdoors in North Carolina. I'm sorry.
Sorry, laundry issues.
That's okay. That's all right. Yep. So it was in North Carolina, in the Outer Banks, down by Kitty Hawk. So so we went there. It was for a children's thing where, charity. So we weren't paid big. Kind of got your gas money, and a couple people stayed in a hotel, and we've got a big trailer. I mean, so unlike the other bands who came, and if they were loud enough, they were loud enough. If not, screw you. So I got to play. I took the Marshall. I fed the PA via the torpedo.
Yeah, Captain X.
Sounded great, but I took the Marshall and I was able to crank it. That's as loud as that Marshall's been for 2 hours at a time ever since I owned it. 80 degrees, hot, not a wisp of cloud in the sky. I'll send you pictures. And beautiful though. A light breeze coming off the ocean. If anybody's familiar with that area, you've got a strip of land that's like out into the ocean, but there's also ocean inland, so it's like a big, huge, almost bay, but it's not. And so it's always destroyed every now and again by hurricanes that go through. It's like, okay, we flattened that, we got to rebuild. So anyway, the plywood business is abundant there, at least twice a year. So it was really nice. It was really fun. Bikers, because it was a motorcycle club thing, Christian motorcycle clubs, and so my co-guitar player had his Les Pauls. I had my Les Paul and my Strat. So here's what I found out live. You can't mix the two. It's just not fun. I didn't put a boost pedal in front for the Strat, and because it was using the Marshall, I had to use the 2 master volumes. I have the CR40. It's got 2 master volumes.
Right.
I'd have one set for the Strat, and one set for the Les Paul because it was completely different. I had the Digitech drop that I had added into the mix, and I did that. I mean, that was the first day I was really using it for any length of time outside of rehearsal. Worked great. And we played, the area that we looked at was maybe 7 or 8 acres. So really big area, as far as the little, and then it was like 100 acres beyond that. It was all flat. And so you had nothing to bring your sound back to you. It was just you projecting that sound out. And you had street noise past the several acres we were at. A few hundred bikes. And there were cars and, vendors and everything else. So, and we were by a trailer park. It was funny because it was like a empty area behind us and a trailer park in front, off to the side. And I always called that. I texted someone and I said, so there's hurricane food over here. That's what hurricanes like to eat, trailers. And then there's the other stuff. So, but it was fun and it was exciting. I we wore black because that's what we had. Let me give you some advice. So I had sunblock 50 on. I'm actually sunburned. You can't, the lighting doesn't show, but I'm burned through here.
I can tell you're a little red and pink in certain places.
Yeah, through the face. But it was so much fun. If I turned off the lighting, you'd see it more. Anyway, but I did bring I was smart. I brought my sunblock. I brought water, and stay hydrated. I drank 60 ounces of water on the way down. So let's just say that I'm glad that there were nice, clean porta potties there available. I made it through the gig, and then it was a lot of fun. They fed us. They gave us water. It was really nice of them. I can't commend them enough. But musically, the Les Paul just sings that open air. I can tell
everything at that volume just sings, though.
It just sang. I mean, yeah, it was the Strat sounded great. I love Strats, but it was my number one Les Paul, the one that's not hanging up. That's the empty hook there. He's in the house, and it's got the badge on there that I put on it. Not on the guitar. I put a sticker, my first tour sticker, I suppose, on it for that thing. And anyway, on the case, and the guitar really showed me why it was my number one. It just was what it did for me. Everything else, but I can tell you, my feet hurt, my legs hurt.
Yeah,
because you're not used to being standing out there, 80 degrees. I was wireless, was running around. I'm a very, not standing in one place kind of musician, and also I'm surprised I've been talking this long because I got to be honest with you, So I sing all the high harmonies and I sing any of the high vocals that come along. And so if there's a high part that's in a song, I sing the high part. The other singer, his voice comes down, I come in. I'm like the auto tune, and then I sing my part, and then he takes back over. There's one song in particular, it's fun because we do My Own Worst Enemy, a song by Lit. And so he's singing kick myself in the ass or whatever. I don't even know the words, to be honest with you.
Sleeping with
but then I go, tell me why. I come in for that. And I sing all that high stuff. Mm-hmm. And then he come back in and he'd sing. And then he goes, gone. So it's fun. And it was a lot of fun. And I think the most important thing that I took from it was I was prepared. Preparedness. I got there. I had my torpedo, but I also had a microphone. Other guitar player forgot his microphone day one. Second day, he brought his mic, forgot his mic stand. I had both of those things. That's 2-hour ride down, 2-hour ride home. You're not running back to get it. I overdid everything, and luckily I never broke a string. I didn't dehydrate. I felt good. I ate very lightly, and I ate fresh fruits and vegetables to stay.
You really have to watch your nutrition on gigs like that, because you can eat the wrong things and feel like garbage on stage, and it's awful.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is have to,
Yeah, don't eat a cheeseburger right before you go onto a stage. It's like 85 degrees out and like humid, I don't ask me how I know, because I can tell you that story and it was not fun.
Yeah, I did not go to Taco Bell. So lots of fun. I recommend that kind of thing for, if your band is going to do it. It felt fulfilling. But the one thing I wished I had, and that's why I got the acoustic, was I wished I had an acoustic, because I kind of tried to use the Strat for acoustic sounds, and it was okay, and it filled in. But it was not an acoustic, and it didn't have the same feel. So I'll just say that.
So I'm not going to show the picture. Maybe we'll flash it on screen. I don't really have much of a gig report this week, but I do have stuff to share. I am. I was gonna go to Open Jam this week. I felt really guilty because I have not been able to get any recording done for the project I'm working on. I'm actually also feeling really guilty because I didn't get the episode out last week, but it'll be out tomorrow. But it's like, I took the night off, right? And I sat and I recorded, and I did like 32 takes of rhythm for the song, and I'm doing punch-ins and stuff too, so it's like not that big a deal. But I thought I'd start with a really good take first, and then do punch-ins on that. Right. And by the time, because I just kept getting interrupted, by the time I got done, like I was sitting there with 32 takes, and I was like, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll work on it. And I didn't come back to the next day. I came back on Sunday, which is 2 days later. I had a rehearsal on Saturday, which we ran through all the tunes. Realized that, we really need to get these things committed to recording, because then we can rehearse them better and we have a better idea of what's going on, instead of kind of feeling out some of the arrangements and stuff. And had a big discussion about business plan and name, which hasn't been cemented yet, but we're getting closer. And kind of sat down, and like, one of the things that was told to me, and I share this with, good faith from my songwriting partner, Tony, that this is cool. So I'm just assuming it is. But, we were talking about business side, and he was like, well, we can go and we can have somebody else mix this stuff. Now, originally I was going to mix it. And because I've spent so much time on this project already, and done all these like rough mixes and stuff to get through the recording process, I'm starting to realize I'm way too attached to this at this point to make good decisions about what things should sound like. And so we are going to farm this out. And at first I was like all excited about it, because I'm like, okay, we'll just pay somebody to do it. It takes it all out of my lap. But then today I was thinking about it, and as I was starting to record, and I was like, well, what do we give the mix engineer? Do I give him dry guitar tracks? Do I give him DIs with no effects on them whatsoever, and assume that he'll do a good job with my guitar sound? And I started having a mild panic attack, because I'm sitting there going like, that's the only thing I have control over. Like in all reality, like when I play as a player, I can't tell the drummer how his drums sound. I cannot tell the bass player how his bass sounds. And I'm sure as shit not going to tell the vocalist these things like crap or whatever. But I do have control over, wow, there's too much mids here. Or wow, there's too much bass here, right? And I can adjust that. But when I put that into somebody else's hands, I need to be able to give them complete faith that they're going to do a good job. Yep. And that is the scariest thing I have ever gone through as a musician. Because that is my voice, right? That's like, I can imagine an actor in a Japanese film coming to the United States and then getting overdubbed, how they feel about the people they hire to overdub them. Sorry.
Bless you.
And I think about that, and I'm like, am I prepared to do this?
Yeah.
Now, Tony has a couple of contacts for recording studios in the area. One of them we use to do rehearsals, and then another that we do, or another that he's done work with. And I think there's actually two he's done work with locally. One of them has done national work, so people for international work, actually, artists from overseas and stuff.
Yep.
And we're leaning towards that. But I told him, I said, this is all contingent on me being able to have a conversation with him so that I can relay what I'm looking for. Because for me, like, I need to have confidence that you're going to treat what I do in a specific way.
Yep.
And I want to see what he's got in his studio for doing the guitar sounds. If I walk in and he's going to run my guitar through a Blackheart, I'm going to be like, dude, come on. You're fucking kidding me, right? Like, no offense, but I know what that amp sounds like. And I don't care how well you know that amp. I've got 3 at home that will outdo that amp any day of the week. It's like, and I've seen people that are like, they post their studio stuff on like Craigslist, like, oh yeah, I'll record you. And then you look at their equipment list and there's like a crate 1x12 GFX. And you're going, are you fucking high? Like, there's no way. There's no way you're going to be able to get good guitar sounds out of that on my project. Not the kind of sounds I'm after. You might be able to get some like grindy death metal kind of tones out of it, but you're not going to do classic rocky, like, 70s Iron Maiden kind of stuff, right? Like, that's where I'm like, come on, man, for real. So, and then I'm gonna approach that conversation with the 3 studios that we interact with and be like, look, if you're gonna be reamping my guitars, let me bring my amp in. I don't care how you mic it. I don't even need to be here when you do it. I'll bring my amp in. I will drop it off for the day. You can mic it up and record it. I will be back at the end of the day to pick it up. Because like I don't want to be involved in that process at all. But that sound is important to me. And like to nail the sound of what I sound like, right? Like that is very important to me. It's just like taking my voice away. And I've never faced this conundrum before. So it's very like, even right now, I have close friends who know how I play and they know what I'm about, right? And like, you know me well enough, Jim. I would not hand you like my tracks, my dry DI tracks and be like, all right, here you go, mix my project. Even though I know you know what I'm supposed to sound like, it's just, I don't feel comfortable with that. It's a dangerous proposition. At the same time, I want the project to sound good.
And for those who are not aware, so the intro music to our thing, our intro and outro, is David and myself. I'm on bass and guitar. David is playing guitar. And he did all the drums. And David also...
I will be doing the drums on this project, too.
Right. And David mixed that project. I gave him a dry signal of 2 or 3 rhythm guitars and the bass. And he quantized the bass and he made sure the guitars sounded right. I trusted David to do that. I'm talking to the listeners.
Yeah, and I was when you were saying that, I was like, are you sure you want me to do this? Like,
yeah. And so I didn't give him some like crazy. He did all the work. So I understand where you're coming from now. Speaking to you again, David, is it that I understand where you're coming from because I knew you knew the sound well enough, and I trusted you to know sound well enough to do it better than I would have done myself.
Right.
And that's why I handed that off to you. And you have to have that trust with your engineer. I have a question on it. So I'm dumb, all right, when it comes to recording stuff. Because I always hear this, I heard this when it came to SRV. I heard this when it came to almost every band I've ever read. They were like, yeah, when we finally get AC/DC, you name it. We finally got into and they gave us the sound like we sound live. And I'm like, what the hell is that supposed to mean? I mean, weren't you in there recording? I mean, wasn't that you standing with your amp and and I know what it means in this sense, like
it's such a bullshit statement though.
But not in here.
That's such a bullshit statement though. Like I've seen you go see bands live and then they claim that they sound just like they do live on the record and you're like, no, you don't.
Yeah, the Eagles maybe.
Not even the Eagles don't. I mean, like, no, because
they're about the closest thing.
Number one, the first thing that you're going to notice is that the space is different, right? Like where they're recording at is different. And when you're recording in a tiny freaking room, it's not going to be like a hall,
Right.
When
or a stadium.
Exactly. When you're in a room with an amp and you're listening to a band and they're not mic'd up and through a PA, right? Because that's a whole other thing. So the bands say that and they're like, you sound just like we do live or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, but how do you know? Because you're not standing out in front of your gear. You're listening to a PA mix. And if you think giving somebody a PA mix is the record is a good idea, no, it's not. It sounds bad, but it sounds like what you need it to. So, okay. Point being, that's just a misnomer statement. Like people say that and what they mean is like it has all the energy and stuff. which
Right.
is a big part of what I want to achieve. And like for me, so I'm getting great performances. I recorded a guitar solo today, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I did the I did the rhythm track and the guitar solo. I did the rhythm track first take. I was like, let's go. Just did it. And then I was like, okay, so there were 2 measures I had to correct in the whole, in like a 5-minute song. So, and the only correction was like I muted a note. Or in one case, I picked the same note. It was a arpeggiated pattern. I picked the same note twice instead of moving the next note.
I hate it when I do that live. God, I hate it.
Yeah, so I just
I know what you mean.
nobody would have noticed because it's buried under distortion and everything. But I noticed, so like I'm gonna fix this because if I don't, it's always gonna bother me. So I fixed it, and then I did the guitar solo, and guitar solo took 64 takes.
Yep.
And I ended up flubbing the end on the perfect take, so I actually punched that in. Which is the only time I've ever punched in a guitar solo in like that I can remember.
And you're punching in the last few notes.
Yeah, I punched in tremolo picking pretty much, which is like hilarious because and so now that when I said this, like people are going to be listening to my project when it's done, they're going to be like, I know that's the one he punched in. And I'm going to laugh and I'm going to say, well, guess what? I have tremolo picking in all of these solos, so good luck. But you know, be it as it may. I'm going to have to consent to this. Like, this is going to happen. I'm going to hand this over to somebody else. But now I've got to work through, and I'm going to share with our listeners as we go through this process. I got to work through, do I give the guy DIs with the preamp effects on them? Like, I use Univibe for certain choruses. And I'm using Univibe on a solo. Do I give him the track with the Univibe already on it? And, like, how do I note to him, like, where I want certain effects? Because I don't want him to have complete control over that. That's part of the songwriting process for me.
That was the part I was going to ask you. So that's the part where I'm like an idiot. So I remember an interview with Alex Lifeson. And he was talking about early time when they, what was their longtime producer, Tony something or other, who told them that he wanted to remove, he wanted him to come in dry, play it dry. He'd put all the effects and blah, blah, blah. When you hand over to a mix engineer, you've already done that production side of it, haven't you? So you've done the mix engineer is doing is finding levels and EQs, right? No? So they're putting effects on there.
Mix engineers basically create the sound of the band. Okay? So like, you watch enough. I'm sure you watch a lot of Rick Beato, because you've mentioned him on the show a lot. Watch some of his things where he talks about mix engineering and how the in the 90s bands like Rage Against the Machine, Korn, all these bands were getting all of their mixes were sent to basically like 3 dudes, right? And those same 3 people were basically using the same kick and snare samples to mix with their existing kick and snare samples. And they were using the same amplifiers for all of them. So like everybody was using the same, they were all getting piped the same dual rectifier or a triple rectifier in the studio with the same cabinet, with the same microphones, probably never even moved because it became like an assembly line. You just pipe that stuff through there because you knew it worked. And that is what, if you are really going to go the mix engineer route, like the traditional way, you're giving them a lot of people will give them a fully engineered track with like, here's my guitars, they don't use it. Right. They go right for the DIs. And that's the first thing they do is like, because they know what works. And they might blend in your original stuff and or when they give you your, like your test mix and you listen to it and you go, I don't like this, then they might consider using some of your original stuff, but like they go for what works. There's a guy locally, and I discovered him today. I was doing some research looking for studios that could potentially be an alternative to what we've already got. And I found a studio, I won't say what their name is, but he said we do a lot of hard rock and a lot of rap and so I looked at the hard rock stuff because that's kind of where we fit. And I was going through his audio clips, and every fucking guitar sound in like 24 clips was the same goddamn guitar sound. And I'm going, It's just a
And
different
it's
guitar
different
through the
bands.
same amp with different guitar, different, through the same amp with same cab. And I'm going, this is not okay. Like, I'm not going to give you my project. That's bullshit. Because the guitar sound should change from band to band, project to project. I don't want your sound. I want our sound. I want you to bring the best out in what we do, not the best in what you do.
Well, that speaks a lot then, because, we all know that a lot of the pop music that I listened to when I was growing up, and of course into the 90s and whether it was country, rock, whatever, were a lot of the same musicians and a lot of the same engineers. And if that's the case, then that's why when someone would say, like, I remember late 90s, early 2000s country music, I was like, geez, I can't tell the difference. I literally can't tell the difference from
Now
one
you
song
know
to the next.
why.
And as a matter of fact, it was so bad. You ever notice, especially this bro country thing, right? You ever notice you can't tell Eric Church from Luke Bryan from whoever?
There's like 4 guitar players playing all of that stuff, which is even more ridiculous.
Right. So not only does band sound the same, but they're EQing the life out of the singer's voice and making it.
They want them to sound the same, because then they fit the mix the same for all the other instruments that are basically being applied either through plugins or at the mix engineer level. So I'm glad we're actually having this conversation. This is not really gig report, except that this is my gig, But I'm pointing out like something that's very important for people to understand when you first start going through this process. Remember, Nick Bongers is on here, right? And he was telling me this story about like his studio recording process for the band that he's in, and I forget their name offhand. It's a secondary band other than the Kiss band,
Right.
And he was talking about like they go in the studio and the guys would go, "No, you're going to use our amps. Like we don't want you to use your amps," because they were already pre-mic'd and everything. And that's a very real thing, and also a very real problem, because like now you're asking me to change 50% of my system, and I'm sorry, I don't agree with the idea that everybody should play the same through every piece of equipment. Every piece of equipment I pick up makes me feel a different way and makes me play differently. And it's not because I'm a bad player. It's because gear emotes to me. It says something to me when it's in my hands. And I can make my PRS sort of do my Strat thing if I want. But but the point is, like, that's not what I have it for. Right? Like I have it for the specific thing that I do with it when I do it, which I am using the PRS on this all over this record. So I don't want to ever end up in a situation where somebody's like, no, you're going to plug into this PV Classic 50 because we know it very well and we've got it mic'd up. It's like, no, dude, I'm paying you by the hour. Give me an hour to mic up my amp properly, record some sound samples, move the mics around. I don't record stereo. I don't even give a shit about that. Like, we're not going to put a 57 and a 9 or 409 or 904 on, or, or 906 on it and a 421. Like, you're going to use one of those three mics. Just use one of those. It's fine. Or a Royer 121, 6 inches off the cone. Like, just pick one. Like, I can go with any of those. And whatever sounds right in the room, right? And what gives you the most signal level and broadest spectrum of frequencies that you can adjust in post to make it fit the mix. Because like if it comes down to this, one of these things where the guy's like, well, what do you want to sound like? Right? Like, what do you want your guitar to sound like? I'm going to tell him, I'm going to be like, look, I want it to be a mix of Eddie Van Halen, Robin Trower, and Jimi Hendrix. Like, if you can do those 3 things and give me sounds that are kind of like in that ballpark from the amplifier on the record, I don't care if the band sounds like that. I'm just saying that's what I want my guitar sound to sound like.
Exactly.
And I can give you specific songs too. So it's like, that's not a problem. But the question is, where's your level of expertise? Can you do this? Or are you just going to take like whatever Fender amp you have lying around, turn it up to 10 and cut all the bass off so that you can hopefully get a good distortion sound out of it? Because unfortunately, a lot of these places are running shoestring budgets, and that's like, if I walk into your studio and you're like, oh, we're going to record here, and I tell you I'm going to play hard rock music, and I'm familiar with Mesa Boogie like style amps, And the guy goes, well, we've got a Fender Twin, and we have, I was thinking like a Marshall's even too close, but like a Fender Twin, and we have a 4x10 Bassman.
Yeah.
And you go, how are you going to give me my sound out of a Fender Twin or a 4x2? Let me get my dual rec out of the truck. You know what I mean? Like, and then they're like, well, no, we want to do that. Could you imagine? Like, that's your sound. You're not going to get the sound of a dual rec out of a 4x10 Bassman. It's just not going to happen.
And that was Lifeson's complaint when they did that to him.
Yeah, because that was the time period where his guitar got really dry, and you started using solid state amps. That
was Grace Under Pressure.
Yeah,
and the one that had the big money was on, and that type of thing. Power Windows. It really did take Alex Lifeson out of what he was to people who listened to him.
I felt like it was a mix engineer trying to turn, when I listened to that stuff, it felt like a mix engineer trying to take Rush and turn him into new wave.
Yeah.
And it was like they're doing this because they're trying to market this band in a very specific direction. And you wonder if that's almost at the request of the recording company rather than, the record company rather than the band, because
it was aesthetic. Yep. It was an aesthetic choice. And I don't mean a physically aesthetic choice, although they were playing Steinbergers and stuff like that, which is kind of aesthetic, but physically. But I mean aesthetic as far as like an aesthetic sound, like you said, trying to make them sound new wave, trying to make them sound,
which that's a rock trio. That's a progressive rock trio. Like that was a mistake.
Big mistake.
You know what I mean? Like there's nothing you can say about that was like, that was a good idea. That was a mistake. In point of fact, I would have tried to get that record remade. Like I would have said, what?
Remixed. Yep.
Let's just take my DIs and go do it over here ourselves. And in that way, maybe if we end up, I mean, we're gonna blow money on this, but if we end up going through this process and I'm not happy with it, I'm gonna be a dick about it. And I'm gonna be like, look, let's take all the other stuff. Let's ask for stems of what he's done, and I'm gonna do the guitar tracks myself. And that may be what ends up happening. But I have a feeling.
I hope so.
If we're putting money on this, I'm just gonna walk in and be like, look, dude, let me just come in. I'll bring you my cab. I'll bring you my amp. I can even let you pick from what I have. I'll tell you what I got, and then I'll just let you amp it in the studio. And like I'm gonna write notes to you about where effects go, and you can just do all that then. And if he says, well, no, actually, why don't you just put that on the tracks that you give me, then I'll be like, okay, I can do all the preamp effects. You can add the delay and the reverb, and because I don't mind that. Like I don't care. You put whatever delay and reverb you want on it. I don't give a shit. Even EQ, like to an extent, I don't care about, because I know people think like, oh no, don't touch my EQ. Listen. You got to cut EQ to tailor to a track. There's nothing you can do about that. The trick is to have the right guitar sound before the EQ, because then when they EQ it, it's not so like it's not a tough choice for them to make. It's like, okay, we know there's a deficiency here for this mix, so we got to just cut a little bit. But also that even though you can apply massive amounts of EQ to a track, the guitar sound is still the guitar sound underneath. You're just you're just cutting away. Like you can still tell. Like if you took Van Halen and added a bunch of bass back into it and then like cut out some treble and stuff, like you could still tell it's Van Halen's tone. You're still going to be able to tell that out of that track. People seem to think that like you can use an EQ to radically change things, unless you're doing drastic things to the mid range, which they're not going to do in a production environment like that. You're not gonna destroy it. So it's just a matter of like bringing the equipment to them and being like, here, let's mic this up and let's do this right. And if I have to pay a little extra to bring my amp in and have him mic it up and then run all my tracks through it for DI, like I'll do it. I don't care. It's an extra. What's it going to cost me? An extra $100? This is an extra hour of time or whatever. Like, it's not a big deal. We already know sort of where we're going to be at cost wise, because it's a 5-song EP. It's not going to be horrendously expensive, but it's, you know, there's going to be some money, and I'm going to pay half of it. So, I want it done right. I'll pay the additional money that I need to do to get it done right. So that's it. But for any of our listeners who've never done this, like, these are interesting things that you've probably never thought about. Like, putting your faith in somebody else that they're going to take your song and your performance and your voice and do it justice, rather than just try to churn out a product that sounds like, you know, some specific rock act. Case in point, like, just to talk about the mix engineering thing, one more step before I close this out here. I mean, listen to those records from, like, anything really from, like, 1998 to, like, 2005. Guitar records, specifically rock and metal. You will hear, and it's got to be the same goddamn triple rec on all of that stuff. Even Rage Against the Machine. I mean, you listen to those records, and they're very clearly not Marshall JCM 800s on some of those tracks. And you're wondering how that happened. It's because they were sent to a mix engineer, and he took the DI and routed it through something else. He might have the 800 mixed in there, but there's something else there too in a lot of those tracks. And like the Korn stuff is all dual recs and triple recs, and they all sound identical. And the Wes Borland sound from Limp Bizkit, it's the same thing. And it's because those bands were providing to the mix engineer subpar guitar sounds for mixing, for the appropriate mix, and he had the ability to just say, screw it, we're gonna go through this amp because I know this works. And you know, they don't, in their situation, they were contractually obligated for the mix engineer to have final say. So the record company signed off, the band didn't say shit, which is one thing that people don't understand, is that it wasn't like the mix engineer sent it back to the band. The mix engineer was the last step in the chain before mastering. The band got to say it mastering. And basically at that point, it was already a done deal, you know? So it's like, tough shit, guys. This is it, you know, it's coming out. And quite frankly, I think everybody would listen to those records and think they're well produced. They sound very, very fucking modern and like fantastic, way over the top, even overproduced even. And that's a sound now, you know?
Yeah.
And it is very specific sound based on a very specific set of techniques done by a very specific set of people over and over and over across many different artists. In fact, if you Google around, you can find out who those people were, and you can actually pass your mixes to them and they'll do what they were doing, which is pretty wild. But because I looked into it a while back, they charge quite a bit of money, to be fair. Of course. But if you want to sound just like Korn in 1998.
Yeah, 1998. Yeah,
send them your mix, and then like you'll get back Korn in 1998. Hey, actually, one last aside. So Billie Eilish, who came up with the Coachella conversation earlier, people like love Phineas, her brother, and his production on that first record, and they're like talking about like how he recorded this at home, and it's so amazing. First off, almost everything you listen to now is probably recorded at home.
Right.
The reality is, even the demo process, for the most part, unless it's a live band like playing all their instruments in the same room, it's probably done in people's home studios. The technology has gotten that good that you can, for a few $1,000s, have a studio to get your instrument recorded in the most professional way possible in a repeatable environment. Second off, what they don't realize is that Phineas was not the only one to win a Grammy for that record. There was a mix engineer. And I can almost guarantee you that the mix engineer made that record. Because they're still doing that stuff. right? You ever wonder why all the pop records sound exactly alike?
Right.
They're getting sent to the same mix engineers. So that's why I think it's funny that he got all the credit, because I'm like, nobody knows what he actually turned into the mix engineer. Like, the only people that know are the mix engineer and the recording company, who probably made the handoff. Now they knew there was enough there when they got it from him to make her a marketable, commodity. So they got good talent people that understood that. But whether his tracks were like demo quality or his tracks were like what's on the album, which I suspect they weren't, is a whole different thing, because they got passed off to a mix engineer. We will never know what they sounded like before that happened.
Right.
So just food for thought.
Well, I think that they did that decision to let people believe it was him.
That's a marketing decision. Absolutely.
Right. Because it shows, look at what this young person did all by themselves. It's the TikTok, YouTube. It
makes her, what do I call it? It gives her credibility, and it gives him credibility.
And it puts her, because she's on their level. They can look at Billie Eilish and project themselves on her.
Right.
That's what people do.
Exactly. So this is not a problem. Like, I'm not railing against
terrible. No.
I'm not railing against Billie Eilish or anything. I want to make it very clear. I'm just saying that, like, that whole thing is sort of a myth, that it was just him and her that made that record. There were a number of other people involved in that process, including a mastering engineer and a mixing engineer and A&R people who were probably making suggestions before the album came out. Maybe they went back and they actually retooled some things. Like, I'm willing to bet that there is a lot more story there than people recognize. And the funny thing is, when you compare this to the way bands used to make records, like, let's say you're Black Sabbath making Black Sabbath, right? The first record.
Yep.
Do you think there was a producer in the room that was making suggestions about what the record company wanted? Or that the record company was involved in that recording process, making suggestions about what Black Sabbath should do? Do you think that record specifically, because I'm sure you've heard it, do you think that record had the studio or had the record company involved in it? They would never have put that record out. They would no way in hell, because it was scary. Like, they would have been like, how are we going to sell this? Like, that's where I'm saying, like, back in the day, the way that the executives looked at things was like totally differently, because they were like, we're just looking for the next big thing, and we're willing to take chances and take risks, and we will let a band self-produce themselves, or bring in a producer that's more receptive to what they want to do. Today it's not like that at all. Today it's to the point where even the music itself is not signed off on until the mix engineer gets to it, and then the record company signs off after that. It's just a whole different, like, it's a totally different world. There's no risks being taken whatsoever in a product, whether it's Billie Eilish, Katy Perry, or Rival Sons. Like, it just doesn't matter. So that's what I wanted to leave our listeners with. When you get into one of these situation conundrums, you got a lot of things to consider, and it can be dangerous, and you have to, like, rationalize your path forward in a way that makes sense for you. So I've been David.
I've been Jim.
And tonight we've been Practical Guitarists.